Something was never quite right in Emily Carter's life, but she didn't know why. Until now. It all started with a simple moment, a casual photo with her father at the mall. But the next day, when she looked closer, everything changed. A missing persons poster, a face identical to hers, a name she had never heard before, and a feeling of terror that made her heart stop. Her life was perfect, or so she thought. But as memories resurface, secrets unravel, and betrayals come to light, Emily will be forced to question everything she's ever known. Who are the people she calls her parents? And if they're lying, who is she really? What happens when the truth is too painful to face? Find out in this gripping, emotional story filled with shocking twists, heartbreaking revelations, and an ending that will leave you breathless. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment below where you're watching from. Let's dive into the mystery. Emily Carter had always felt a strange pull toward things she couldn't explain. Little moments in her life, fleeting, insignificant to anyone else, always carried a strange weight. Like the time she found an old stuffed bear in the attic, its button eyes worn, its fur faded, but something about it felt familiar. Her mother had said it belonged to a cousin she had never met, but Emily never truly believed that. Or the way her father would sometimes watch her with an expression that was hard to define. Something between admiration and hesitation, like he was seeing something more than just his daughter. But nothing prepared her for what was about to happen. It was supposed to be an ordinary day. The sun was bright in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement as she and her father, Daniel Carter, walked through the outdoor shopping center. Emily had asked him to go with her because she wanted a new dress for an upcoming school event, and he never said no to spending time with her. They laughed together as they passed the stores, their easy relationship one of the things she cherished most in her life. She had always felt safe with him. "Let's take a picture," she said, pulling out her phone. Daniel hesitated for the briefest second, something she barely noticed, before nodding. She leaned in, angling the camera to capture both of them with the bright store lights behind them. They smiled. She snapped the photo, a simple, happy moment frozen in time. That night, a storm rolled in suddenly. Rain lashed against the windows, lightning flashing in the sky, illuminating her bedroom in brief, eerie bursts. She lay in bed, scrolling through her phone, reliving the day. She stopped at the photo, smiling at the memory. But then something caught her eye. Her fingers trembled as she zoomed in. Behind them, taped to a light pole, was a missing persons poster. That alone wasn't so unusual. But what made her blood run cold was the face staring back at her. A little girl with soft features, big eyes, and dark brown hair. A face that looked exactly like hers. Emily felt the air rush out of her lungs. The name under the photo wasn't hers. Rebecca Mitchell. A cold, unexplainable terror crept through her veins as she stared at the name, at the dates, at the words written in bold black letters beneath them. Missing since 2009. Last seen at age 3. She could barely breathe. She shut off her phone, forcing herself to take deep, steadying breaths. It had to be a mistake. Coincidence. There were people who looked alike all the time. But as much as she tried to rationalize it, her mind wouldn't let go. The uneasy feeling had been there all along. This sense that something in her life was slightly off, like a puzzle with a missing piece. And now, that missing piece had appeared in the most terrifying way. The next morning, her mother, Laura, was in the kitchen, humming softly as she poured coffee. Everything was normal. Everything should have felt safe. But Emily felt like she was walking through a dream, her limbs heavy, her mind spinning. "Did you sleep well?" her mother asked, stirring sugar into her cup. Emily hesitated. "I had weird dreams," she muttered. Her mother gave her a small, knowing smile. "Probably because of the storm. You were always sensitive to those when you were little." Emily's heart skipped a beat. When you were little. Suddenly, she wasn't so sure how much of her childhood she actually remembered. She cleared her throat, keeping her voice light. "Mom, do we have any baby pictures of me?" Laura blinked, then set her coffee down. "Of course we do. Can I see them?" A small pause, barely noticeable. I don't know where they are right now, Laura said carefully, but I'll look later. Something wasn't right. Her mother had always been the kind of person who kept everything organized. Photo albums, school certificates, old report cards. There was no way she didn't know where Emily's baby pictures were. Later that day, while her parents were out, Emily went searching. She combed through every shelf, every drawer, every box in the attic and basement. She found pictures from vacations, birthdays, holidays, but there were almost no photos of her before the age of 4. And the few she found, something about them felt staged. Her hands shook as she stared at a picture of herself, a toddler sitting on a park bench, but the background was blurred, the edges of her face slightly smudged, like an old photo that had been altered. Her stomach twisted. That night, she sat in her room, the missing persons poster open on her phone. Her heart pounded as she read the details again. Rebecca Mitchell, brown eyes, birthmark on her right shoulder. Emily's fingers trembled as she reached up, pulling the collar of her shirt aside. A small, faded birthmark sat on her right shoulder. She dropped her phone, her breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't a coincidence. Couldn't be. Someone had lied to her. Her mind raced. She couldn't ask her parents, not yet. Not until she had more proof. She needed answers, and there was only one person who might be able to help. Claire, her best friend. The next day at school, Emily pulled Claire aside, her voice urgent. I need to show you something, she whispered. They sat together in the library, huddled over Emily's phone. Claire's expression changed as she stared at the poster. That looks just like you, she murmured. I know, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Emily, this is serious. Claire's eyes darted around as if making sure no one else could hear. Do you think your parents know something? Emily hesitated. I don't know, but I have to find out. A thought struck her then. The missing poster had been printed recently. That meant someone was still looking for Rebecca Mitchell. For her pulse pounded. I need to find out who put up that poster. Claire nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. Then we start looking. That night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with questions. Who was Rebecca Mitchell? What had happened 15 years ago? And if she had been taken from another family, why had her parents done it? And what if the truth was worse than she could imagine? She closed her eyes, willing herself to sleep. But deep down, she knew. Her life was about to change forever. The weight of the truth pressed down on Emily's chest like a crushing force, suffocating her with every unanswered question. The missing girl, the birthmark, the unsettling way her parents dodged any conversation about her early childhood. It all pointed to something far bigger than she had ever imagined. But the worst part wasn't just the possibility that she wasn't who she thought she was. It was the fact that the people she had trusted her entire life, her parents, might have been the ones who kept the truth from her. She hadn't confronted them yet. She couldn't. Not until she had something undeniable. Something they couldn't brush off with carefully chosen words and reassuring smiles. And that's why she and Claire now stood outside the mall, staring up at the very spot where the missing persons poster had been taped to the pole. But it was gone. Emily's stomach twisted. It was right here, she murmured, running her fingers over the metal pole as if that would bring the paper back. Claire scanned the area, her arms crossed. Are you sure it wasn't just taken down? Emily shook her head. I don't think so. It looked recent when I saw it. Someone put it up for a reason. Claire hesitated before pulling out her phone. Okay, let's think. Someone had to put it there, right? Maybe the security cameras caught them? Emily's heart leapt at the idea. That's smart. But how do we get the footage? Claire chewed on her lip, then grinned. We ask. Before Emily could protest, Claire grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the security office inside the mall. The small room was tucked near the back hallways, where the employees disappeared behind staff-only doors. Claire knocked, and a bored-looking security guard opened it. Can I help you? Claire put on her most innocent smile. Hi. So, my friend lost something really important, and we were wondering if the security cameras might have caught it. We think it happened outside, near the parking lot. The guard frowned. We don't usually give out footage like that. Claire glanced at Emily, who forced a small, desperate look. It was really personal. Please, if we could just take a quick look. The guard sighed, rubbing his temple. Fine, but I can't let you watch the footage yourself. I'll check for you. Emily's breath caught as he sat down at the monitors and rewound the footage from the previous day. She held her hands together, her pulse hammering as she watched the screen. And then, there! She burst out before she could stop herself. The screen showed a shadowy figure taping the poster to the pole late at night, their face hidden beneath a hood. They moved quickly, looking around as if afraid of being seen. And then, just as they turned slightly toward the camera, the grainy footage captured the faintest glimpse of a face. Emily's heart nearly stopped. It was a woman. Her hands shook as she leaned closer. Something about the woman's face, her eyes, the shape of her mouth. It sent a jolt of familiarity through her body, like a forgotten memory trying to resurface. Can you zoom in? She whispered. The guard frowned. This is the best I can do. The image wasn't clear enough to recognize her fully, but Emily knew. Deep down, she knew that this woman had something to do with her. Claire glanced at her, her expression serious. We need to find her. Emily nodded, the determination settling deep in her bones. That night, Emily sat in her room, staring at the blurred image she had secretly snapped from the screen. Who was this woman, and why had she put up the poster? A knock at her door made her jump. She quickly shoved her phone under her pillow as her mother stepped inside. Hey, sweetie, you've been quiet today, Laura said, her voice gentle. Everything okay? Emily forced a smile. Yeah, just tired. Her mother studied her for a long moment. Then, softly, you know you can talk to me about anything, right? Something about the way she said it, so carefully, so deliberately, made Emily's skin prickle. She knew. She had to know. But instead of pressing further, Laura simply smiled, kissed the top of Emily's head, and walked out. As soon as she was gone, Emily reached under her pillow, gripping her phone tightly. She had a feeling her mother knew more than she was letting on, and she was going to find out the truth no matter what it took. The next morning, Emily skipped school. She hadn't planned it, but as soon as she woke up, a single thought had planted itself in her mind, growing stronger with every passing minute. She needed to find the woman from the poster footage. Claire had reluctantly agreed to help, even though she had insisted that Emily was probably losing her mind. But Emily didn't care. She felt drawn to this, like some unseen force was pulling her toward answers she wasn't even sure she was ready for. Their first stop was the police station. Emily's hands were clammy as she stood at the front desk, Claire beside her. A young officer glanced up, looking slightly bored. Can I help you? Emily swallowed. Yes. I think I might have information about a missing person case. That got his attention. He sat up, looking at her more seriously. Okay, what case? Emily hesitated before pulling up the image of the missing poster on her phone. Rebecca Mitchell. I saw this at the mall yesterday, but when I went back today, it was gone. The officer frowned. Rebecca Mitchell? He turned to his computer, typing something. After a long silence, he shook his head. There's no active missing persons case under that name. Emily's heart skipped a beat. What? The officer sighed. There was a case 15 years ago, but it was closed. No further investigations. Emily felt like the ground had just been pulled out from under her. Closed? Claire glanced at her, her expression tight. What does that mean? The officer shrugged. Usually, that means the person was either found or declared deceased. Emily's breath hitched. But I'm right here. She forced herself to stay calm. And if someone put up a missing poster recently? The officer exhaled. Look, I don't know who put that up, but it's not an open case anymore. Emily nodded stiffly, pulling Claire away. As soon as they were outside, she let out a shaky breath. They closed the case. But I'm not dead. Claire frowned. So why did they stop looking for you? Emily didn't have an answer. But as she looked down at the blurry image of the mysterious woman on her phone, she felt a chill run through her body. Someone had put up that poster for a reason, and that meant someone still knew the truth, and she was going to find out what it was. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing on the edge of something enormous, something life-changing, something that had been buried for far too long. The missing persons case, her case, had been closed. But why? What did that mean? Who had decided to stop looking for Rebecca Mitchell? And why had that woman put up a poster now after all these years? It didn't make sense. She felt like she was losing her grip on reality. Like every moment of her life before this discovery had been a carefully constructed illusion. She had always trusted her parents. They had always been there for her. But now, she couldn't ignore the holes in her past. The missing baby pictures, the way her mother had reacted when she asked about them. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. Something was wrong, and she had to find out what. Claire had been quiet ever since they left the police station. Normally, she was the one to talk first, to fill the silence with reassurances or sarcastic comments. But this time, she was uncharacteristically serious. What if? Claire hesitated, her fingers tapping nervously on the strap of her bag. What if you don't want to know the truth? Emily turned to her, frowning. What are you talking about? Claire exhaled, staring straight ahead. I mean, if your parents, if they're hiding something this big, don't you think there's a reason? What if it's something you don't want to hear? Emily swallowed hard. Then I'll deal with it. Claire finally looked at her, her expression torn. But what if it changes everything? Emily's stomach twisted. It already had. That night, she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the poster, the blurred image of the woman from the security footage, the birthmark on her own shoulder. She was starting to feel like a stranger in her own skin, like the person she had always believed herself to be wasn't real. At 3 a.m., she gave up on trying to sleep and sat up in bed, pulling out her phone. She stared at the image of the poster again, her mind racing. Someone had put it up for a reason. Someone still thought Rebecca Mitchell was missing, and that meant someone might know the truth. Her fingers hovered over the search bar. She had already looked up the name before, but maybe she had missed something. Taking a deep breath, she typed, Rebecca Mitchell Missing Case 2009. Dozens of articles appeared, most of them old, archived reports from local news stations. She clicked on the first one, her pulse hammering. 3-year-old Rebecca Mitchell disappeared from her home in Chicago on the night of August 17, 2009. Authorities reported no signs of forced entry. The child's mother, Linda Mitchell, made a public plea for information, but no leads were found. The case was closed in 2014 due to lack of evidence. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Linda Mitchell, the woman in the security footage. A cold chill ran down her spine. She clicked on another article. There was a picture of Linda, taken years ago, her face streaked with tears as she held up a photograph of her missing daughter. The missing daughter who had her face. Emily's stomach churned. She felt like she was going to be sick. Her hands trembled as she scrolled down. The article mentioned a few details about the night Rebecca went missing, but one sentence stood out. Authorities initially investigated the possibility of parental abduction, as the child's father had been involved in a custody dispute. However, no evidence supported this theory, and the case remained unsolved. Emily's fingers tightened around her phone. Custody dispute. Was it possible that her father, the man who had raised her, loved her, had taken her from her real family? She didn't want to believe it. She couldn't, but the pieces were falling into place. The next morning, Emily walked into the kitchen, her heart pounding. Her father was at the table, drinking coffee, reading the newspaper like he did every morning. Everything looked so normal, so routine. But Emily felt like she was looking at a stranger. She sat down across from him. "Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you remember anything about when I was little? Like, before we moved here?" Daniel Carter looked up from his newspaper, his brow furrowing. "What kind of question is that?" Emily forced a small smile. "I don't know. Just curious. I don't really remember much from when I was little." Her father hesitated, setting down his coffee. Well, we moved around a lot. Your mom and I wanted a fresh start, so we didn't keep a lot from our old house. Emily's throat tightened. A fresh start. That was a convenient way to erase the past. Before she could say anything else, her mother walked in. "Oh, honey, can you help me with something in the basement?" Laura asked, her voice too casual, too forced. Emily glanced at her father. His face was unreadable. "Sure," she said, standing. Her mother led her downstairs, into the cool, dimly lit basement. As soon as the door shut behind them, Laura turned to her, her expression tense. "Emily, I need you to stop asking questions." Emily's heart dropped. "What?" Her mother exhaled shakily. "I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but I need you to let it go." Emily's hands curled into fists. "Let what go?" Laura's face twisted with something. Guilt, maybe, or fear. The past. There's no reason to dig it up. Emily took a step back, her stomach churning. "So you are hiding something." Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm protecting you." Emily's blood ran cold. She shook her head. "From what?" Laura swallowed hard. "From the truth." Emily felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "What truth?" she whispered. Laura's gaze flickered toward the stairs, as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. Then, very softly, she said, "If you go looking for answers, you might not like what you find." Emily's heart pounded against her ribs. She couldn't do this. She couldn't live with these half-truths, with the suffocating weight of secrets pressing down on her. That night, she made a decision. She was going to find Linda Mitchell. She didn't care what her parents said. She didn't care what it would cost, because she wasn't Emily Carter. She was Rebecca Mitchell, and she was finally going to learn who she really was. Emily had never felt so certain about anything in her life. She had spent the last 15 years living in a world built on lies, and now the truth was right in front of her, waiting to be uncovered. There was no turning back. The name Linda Mitchell echoed in her mind like a haunting whisper. The woman from the security footage, the name from the missing person report, her real mother. The pieces were there, scattered like fragments of a puzzle. She had been blind to her entire life. But why? Why had her parents, no, the people who raised her, taken her? And why had Linda resurfaced after all these years? Emily didn't have the answers, but she knew exactly where to find them. She sat on her bed, gripping her phone, her pulse hammering in her ears. Claire had been hesitant when Emily told her the plan, but eventually, she agreed to help. Now, she was waiting for her message. A text buzzed on the screen. "Claire, I found her. I got an address." Emily's heart stopped. She barely registered, her fingers moving as she typed back. "Emily, where?" 3 dots appeared. Then, "Claire. She lives in a small house on the outskirts of town. It's a long shot, but it's the only Linda Mitchell I could find who fits the age and location." Emily didn't hesitate. "Emily, send me the address. I'm going." "Claire, are you sure? This could be dangerous." "Emily, I have to do this." A moment later, the address popped up on her screen. She inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. This was it. Her hands trembled as she stuffed her phone into her pocket and pulled on a jacket. She had to be careful. If her parents suspected anything, they would stop her. She couldn't let that happen. She opened her bedroom door slowly, listening. The house was quiet. Her father was probably in his office, her mother in the kitchen. She slipped out, creeping down the hallway, then down the stairs. Every creak in the wooden floor sent her heart pounding. She reached the front door. Her fingers wrapped around the doorknob. "Emily?" She froze. Her mother stood in the doorway to the kitchen, a dish towel in her hands. Her expression was unreadable. Emily forced a shaky smile. "Yeah." Laura tilted her head slightly. "Where are you going?" For a split second, Emily considered lying. But she knew her mother. She would see right through it. So she did the next best thing. "Just out for a drive," she said as casually as she could. "Needed some air." Laura studied her. "You seem tense." Emily shrugged. "Just school stress." A beat of silence. Then slowly Laura nodded. Okay, just don't be out too late. Emily exhaled. I won't. She turned, opened the door, and stepped outside. The cool night air hit her skin like a shock, but she barely noticed. Her heart was still racing, her pulse loud in her ears. She had done it. She was free. For now. She climbed into her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could still feel her mother's eyes on her, even though she was gone. A part of her wanted to turn back, to pretend none of this was happening. But it was happening, and there was no escaping the truth. She started the engine and pulled onto the road. The drive felt like an eternity. The address Claire had sent was far from town, past rows of darkened houses and winding roads that seemed to stretch on forever. Her headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating trees that loomed like silent sentinels. Finally, she reached the destination. A small, weathered house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, nestled between overgrown trees. The windows were dark. The porch light flickered weakly. Emily swallowed hard. This was it. She climbed out of the car, her legs shaky as she approached the front door. Every step felt heavier than the last. She raised a hand, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then knocked. Silence. Her breath caught in her throat. Then footsteps, slow, hesitant. The door creaked open just an inch. A woman stood in the doorway, her face partially hidden in the dim light. Her eyes, however, were clear, wide, startled, and filled with something Emily couldn't quite define. Recognition. Emily's throat tightened. Linda. The woman's breath hitched. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Rebecca. Emily's world tilted. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying, like she had just stepped into a reality that wasn't hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Linda pushed the door open wider. Come in, she said, her voice shaking. Emily stepped inside, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The house was small and cluttered, but not in a messy way. More like someone had spent years collecting memories, afraid to let go of anything. The walls were lined with photographs, framed and unframed, scattered across shelves and tables. Emily's breath caught when she saw them. Pictures of a little girl. A girl with her face, her knees nearly buckled. Linda followed her gaze, her own eyes glassy with emotion. I never stopped looking for you, she whispered. Emily turned to her, a million questions swirling in her mind. Who am I? She asked, her voice barely audible. Linda's face crumpled. You're my daughter. The words hit like a physical blow. Tears burned in Emily's eyes. But how? How did I end up with them? Linda took a shaky breath. It's complicated. Emily clenched her fists. Then explain it to me. Linda looked away, as if trying to gather the strength. She broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth. Emily's chest tightened. Please, she whispered. I need to know. Linda swallowed hard, then met Emily's eyes. I don't know everything, she admitted, but I know that 15 years ago, you disappeared from your bedroom in the middle of the night. No one could explain how. There was no sign of forced entry, no evidence of who took you. The police suspected your father, your biological father, but they could never prove anything. The case went cold. And then, it was closed. Emily's head spun. But I don't remember any of that. Linda smiled sadly. You were only 3. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. And she hesitated, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. My real father? Linda's expression darkened. He was not a good man. Emily's pulse quickened. Did he? No, Linda shook her head quickly. No, he loved you, but he wasn't stable. When we divorced, he fought for custody. He swore he'd never let me take you away from him. And then, you were gone. Emily's stomach churned. Could it be true? Could the people who had raised her, the people she had called mom and dad her entire life, have taken her to protect her from someone dangerous? Or was there something more? A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then Linda reached out, hesitating before gently taking Emily's hands. "I don't know what they told you," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but I never stopped looking for you." Emily's vision blurred. A sob tore through her chest before she could stop it. Linda pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Emily felt like she belonged. But deep down, a single, terrifying question remained. If my real father didn't take me, then who did? Emily felt like her entire world had been shattered and reassembled into something unrecognizable. Everything she had ever believed about herself, about her family, had been built on a foundation of lies. The people she had loved, her parents, had stolen her from another life, from another mother who had never stopped looking for her. And now, standing in this unfamiliar house, with Linda Mitchell's arms wrapped tightly around her, Emily wasn't sure who she was anymore. She wanted to feel safe in Linda's embrace, to accept this woman as her mother, but a deep unease clawed at her chest. She had no memories of this life, no recollection of ever being Rebecca Mitchell. All she knew was the life she had lived as Emily Carter. And as much as she hated to admit it, the thought of letting go of that identity terrified her. When Linda finally pulled away, tears streaked down her face. She reached up, cupping Emily's cheeks with trembling hands, searching her eyes like she still couldn't believe she was real. "I never stopped hoping," Linda whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I never gave up. I always knew. Somehow, I always knew you were out there." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, her voice barely audible. "I don't remember you." Linda's face crumpled. For a split second, pain flashed in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with a soft, understanding smile. "You were so young," she murmured. "I didn't expect you to remember, but I remember everything." Emily's stomach twisted. She wanted to believe her. She wanted to embrace this new reality, to fill in the gaps of her lost childhood. But a nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered that it wasn't that simple. She had loved her parents, and despite everything, a part of her still did. If they had truly stolen her, if they had taken her from a life that wasn't theirs to claim, why? Why go through all of this? Why risk everything? And why, after all these years, had Linda suddenly resurfaced? Emily stepped back, shaking her head, trying to process everything. "I don't." Her voice cracked. She ran a hand through her hair, exhaling shakily. "I don't understand any of this. Why would they take me? They weren't bad people." Linda's expression darkened slightly. "Emily, you don't know what they're capable of." Emily's stomach churned. "What do you mean?" Linda hesitated. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it, her lips pressing into a thin line. Emily's pulse quickened. "What aren't you telling me?" Linda sighed, looking away. I don't want to overwhelm you." Emily clenched her fists. "I need to know the truth." Linda looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered. "Then I'll tell you." She walked over to a small wooden cabinet, opening a drawer and pulling out a thick, worn envelope. She held it tightly, as if it carried the weight of years of pain and unanswered questions. Then, carefully, she handed it to Emily. Emily stared at it, her heart pounding. "What is this?" "Proof," Linda said simply. Emily hesitated before slowly opening the envelope. Inside, she found a stack of old documents, court records, police reports, hospital records. Her hands trembled as she sifted through them, scanning the words that blurred together in her mind. Child custody dispute between Linda Mitchell and Charles Mitchell. Court denied Charles Mitchell's request for full custody due to psychological instability. Emily's breath hitched. August 17, 2009 missing child report filed for Rebecca Mitchell. No sign of forced entry. Her stomach turned violently, and then her entire body froze. One document stood out among the others. A birth certificate. Her birth certificate. And in the space where her father's name should have been, it was blank. Emily's throat tightened. "I don't." She shook her head, her voice breaking. "Why isn't there a name?" Linda's expression was unreadable. "Because I never put his name on it." Emily's mind spun. Why? She demanded. Linda hesitated. Then, softly, almost regretfully, because I didn't know who your father was. The words knocked the air from Emily's lungs. She stumbled back, gripping the table behind her for support. That's not. She shook her head violently. That doesn't make sense. Linda's eyes filled with something unreadable. I was young. I made mistakes. But you were never one of them. Emily's hands shook. But I thought you said my father. I lied. Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. Not to hurt you, not to protect him, but because I didn't want you to know the truth. Emily felt like the walls were closing in on her. Her entire life, she had been searching for answers. And now she wasn't sure she wanted them. If Linda was telling the truth, then the people who raised her weren't just kidnappers. They had taken her to hide her from something even worse. The room spun. Emily pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to steady herself. This changed everything. If her real father was never in the picture, then who had taken her? And why? Her phone buzzed. She barely registered the sound, her fingers moving on autopilot as she pulled it from her pocket. A message from Claire. Claire. Emily, something's wrong. I found something. Emily's blood ran cold. Her fingers flew over the screen. Emily, what did you find? The reply came almost instantly. Claire, you need to get out of there. Now. Emily's breath caught. She looked up, her pulse thundering in her ears. Linda was watching her, concern etched on her face. Emily? Emily swallowed hard. She hesitated. I have to go. Linda's face fell. Wait. But Emily was already moving. Her mind screamed at her to stay, to demand more answers, to piece together the fragments of her stolen life. But instinct told her something else. She needed to leave. Now, she bolted for the door, yanking it open, stumbling out into the cold night air. Her heart pounded as she fumbled with her keys, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She climbed into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut. Her hands trembled as she started the engine. And as she pulled onto the road, glancing in the rearview mirror, she saw something that made her stomach drop. A car, parked across the street, headlights off. But she knew someone was watching her. Emily's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow and unsteady. The car in the rearview mirror remained still, its dark silhouette blending into the night. No headlights, no movement, but she could feel it. Someone was watching her. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to drive, to get as far away from here as possible. But her mind spun with 1,000 unanswered questions. Who was in that car? Had they been following her? Or had they been watching Linda's house the whole time? Claire's message echoed in her head. You need to get out of there. Now, whatever she had found, it had been enough to send her into full panic mode. Emily's pulse raced as she threw the car into drive and peeled away from the curb. She forced herself to keep her breathing steady, to keep her focus on the road, but every few seconds, her eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror. The car didn't move. She didn't know if that was better or worse. She turned the first corner, then another, driving aimlessly through the quiet streets until she was sure she was far enough away. Only then did she finally pull into an empty parking lot and cut the engine. For a long moment, she just sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to calm the storm raging inside her. Her phone buzzed again. Claire, where are you? Emily exhaled shakily, her fingers trembling as she typed back. Emily, I left. What did you find? The reply came almost instantly. Claire, it's bad. Really bad. Meet me now. Emily's stomach twisted. She typed back a single word. Emily. Where? Minutes later, she pulled up in front of Claire's house, the porch light casting a soft glow in the dark. Claire was already waiting outside, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale and tense. Emily barely had time to put the car in park before Claire was yanking open the passenger door and sliding in beside her. Drive, Claire said, her voice urgent. Emily frowned. What? Just go, Claire insisted. Somewhere no one can hear us. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Without another word, she pulled out of the driveway, heading toward an empty lot near the edge of town, where no one ever went at this time of night. As soon as she parked, she turned to Claire, her heart hammering. "Tell me." Claire swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her phone. "Emily, I don't think Linda is telling you everything." Emily's breath caught. "What do you mean?" Claire hesitated before turning her phone toward Emily. The screen displayed an old newspaper article, dated from years ago. The headline made Emily's stomach drop. "The Disappearance of Rebecca Mitchell. A case with too many questions." Emily's pulse thundered as she read. The article detailed everything she had already learned: how Rebecca had gone missing in 2009, how the police had suspected her biological father, how the case had eventually gone cold. But as she continued reading, something new caught her eye. While authorities focused on Charles Mitchell as the primary suspect, an overlooked detail in the investigation raised further questions. At the time of Rebecca's disappearance, Linda Mitchell was found unconscious in her home, claiming to have been drugged by an unknown intruder. However, no physical evidence supported this claim. Some investigators quietly questioned whether Linda herself could have been involved in her daughter's disappearance, though no charges were ever filed. Emily's head spun. She was a suspect?" she whispered, barely able to form the words. Claire nodded grimly. "Not officially, but the police had doubts. She said someone drugged her, but they never found any proof. And get this?" She scrolled further down, highlighting another paragraph. "5 months before you went missing, Linda was in the middle of a custody battle. Your father was fighting for full custody, and it was getting ugly." Emily's stomach churned. "So you think what? That she took me and made it look like someone else did?" Claire hesitated. "I don't know. But Emily, something isn't right. If Linda was innocent, why would the police have doubts? And why did she suddenly disappear from the public eye after the case went cold?" Emily shook her head violently. "No, that doesn't make sense. If she had taken me, she wouldn't be putting up missing posters now." Claire exhaled. "Unless she lost track of you." A heavy silence settled between them. Emily's hands shook as she processed everything. Could it be true? Could Linda have taken her all those years ago, only for someone else to take her again? And if that was the case, who had taken her the second time? She felt like she was drowning, trapped in a maze with no way out. She had come looking for answers, but all she had found were more questions. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Emily's breath hitched. Slowly, she pressed answer. For a moment, there was silence. Then, "Rebecca." Emily's blood ran cold. The voice was low, rough, almost unrecognizable. But something about it made her entire body tense. A slow, eerie chuckle crackled through the speaker. "You've been looking for answers, haven't you?" Emily's throat went dry. "Who is this?" The voice ignored her. "I've been waiting for this day for a long time." Emily's fingers curled around the phone. "Who are you?" A pause. Then, almost amused, "You already know." A sharp click. The line went dead. Emily's chest heaved, her mind racing. Claire stared at her, eyes wide. "Who was that?" Emily's lips parted, but no words came. Because deep down, she had a horrible feeling. A feeling that whoever it was, they had been watching her for a long, long time, and now they were ready to make their move. Emily could feel her heartbeat in her throat, a rapid, erratic rhythm that threatened to drown out every other sound around her. The voice on the phone still echoed in her head, every syllable sinking deep into her skin like ice. "You already know." But she didn't know. Or maybe she did and she just didn't want to admit it. She stared at her phone, her fingers gripping it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Claire was watching her, eyes wide, her own breathing shallow. "Emily," Claire whispered. "Who was that?" Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper. She hesitated, her mind spinning. "I don't know, but they knew my name. My real name." Claire's face paled. "That's not possible. Only a few people know about this. Me, you, your parents, and Linda." A shiver ran down Emily's spine. Then that means someone else has been watching. Someone who knew before I did. Claire's lips parted as if to say something, but no words came. She exhaled shakily and glanced around as if expecting someone to be lurking in the shadows. "We can't stay here," she said finally, her voice urgent. "We don't know who that was or what they want. We need to go somewhere safe." Emily wanted to agree. Every rational part of her knew that they should be getting as far away from this as possible. But at the same time, she felt like she was on the verge of something big, something that could finally give her the answers she had been chasing. What if she ran now and lost her chance to know the truth? Her fingers hovered over her phone screen. The call had come from an unknown number. No way to track it, no way to call back. But the voice had sounded so familiar. A sudden, horrible thought gripped her. "What if it was my father?" she whispered. Claire's head snapped up. "What?" Emily's chest tightened. "My real father. Linda said she never put his name on my birth certificate." "What if?" She hesitated, struggling to force the words out. "What if he's been looking for me this whole time?" Claire's expression darkened. "And he just happens to call you now? Right after you start digging into your past?" Emily exhaled sharply. "I don't know. But that voice, it felt like someone who knew me." Claire rubbed her temples. "Okay, let's think about this logically. If he was the one who took you, why would he call you now instead of trying to find you before?" Emily's stomach churned. That was the question, wasn't it? If her father had been behind her disappearance, if he had stolen her from Linda all those years ago, why had he waited so long to reach out? Unless he hadn't been the one who took her. A cold realization settled over her like a heavy weight. If Linda hadn't taken her, if her father hadn't taken her, then who had? Her hands trembled as she locked her phone and shoved it into her pocket. "I need to go home," she muttered, her mind racing. Claire frowned. "Emily, I really don't think. I need to talk to my parents," Emily interrupted. "I need to hear it from them." Claire hesitated but finally nodded. "Okay, but I'm coming with you." Emily didn't argue. She wasn't sure she wanted to be alone for this. They drove back in silence, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Emily's thoughts spun wildly, every possibility flashing through her mind like a reel of unfinished film. By the time they reached her house, her hands were clammy, her breath uneven. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the living room window. Her father's car was in the driveway. They were home. Emily's stomach twisted as she stepped out of the car. Claire followed close behind, her expression wary. "Are you sure about this?" Claire whispered. No, she wasn't sure about anything anymore, but she had no choice. Emily pushed open the front door. Her father was in the living room, sitting on the couch, flipping through the pages of a book. When he saw her, he smiled. "Hey, sweetheart, you were out late." Emily's fingers curled into fists. "I need to talk to you." Daniel Carter frowned, setting the book down. "Of course. What's wrong?" Her mother walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. When she saw Emily's face, she immediately tensed. "What happened?" Laura asked, her voice cautious. Emily took a shaky breath. "I know." The room fell into a heavy silence. Her father's face remained unreadable, but her mother froze. Emily's chest ached. "You took me, didn't you?" she whispered. "You stole me." Laura's face crumpled. Her father sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Emily, it's not that simple." Emily's voice broke. "Then explain it to me." Her mother swallowed hard. She shook her head. "We saved you." Emily's breath hitched. She had expected them to deny it, to lie, to make excuses. But the sheer conviction in her mother's voice sent a chill through her. "You saved me?" Emily echoed. "From what?" Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "From him." Emily's heart pounded. She knew exactly who she meant. Her father. Her real father. Daniel exhaled sharply, as if he had been preparing for this moment for years. "Emily, you were never supposed to find out like this." Emily's hands trembled. "Then tell me the truth." Her mother's voice broke. Your biological father, he was dangerous. I don't just mean unstable. I mean truly dangerous. He had power, Emily. He had influence. And he would have done anything to keep you. Emily's chest tightened. You're saying he would have hurt me? Her mother's face crumpled. I know he would have. Emily shook her head violently. You expect me to believe that? You don't have to believe us, her father said quietly. But you need to listen. Emily's mind spun. Nothing made sense. Nothing fit. She had spent so long believing that she had been stolen, that she had been taken. But what if she had been rescued? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Another unknown number. Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. The caller ID flashed for only a second, but it was long enough for her to see the name. Mitchell Law Firm. Her breath hitched. She looked up at her parents. They were watching her carefully, waiting. She pressed answer. A slow, deep breath came through the receiver. Then, hello, Rebecca. Her blood ran cold. She had been wrong. She hadn't been rescued. She had just been hiding. And now, after 15 years, he had found her. Emily's entire body locked in place. The phone was pressed against her ear, but she could barely hear the breathing on the other end over the deafening pounding in her chest. Hello, Rebecca. The voice was calm, smooth, deceptively gentle, but there was something about it that sent a deep, primal fear crawling through her veins. She couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. Her father, the man she had always believed was her father, took a slow step forward, his face pale but controlled. Emily, he said quietly, eyes locked on hers. Hang up the phone. She didn't move. The voice on the other end let out a quiet chuckle, low and deliberate. You've grown up, the man murmured. I always wondered if I'd recognize your voice after all these years, but I knew it the second I heard it. Her hands trembled. Who? Her voice cracked. She forced herself to speak. Who are you? Silence. Then, you already know. A cold wave of nausea rolled over her. Her mother took a sharp breath, stepping beside Daniel. Emily, listen to me. Don't engage with him. The voice on the phone shifted, like he was smiling. Ah, Laura. Still trying to control everything, I see. Emily's breath hitched. He knew her mother. Knew them. Daniel clenched his jaw. Don't talk to her, he snapped. Whatever you think you're doing, it ends now. A soft exhale. Oh, Daniel, you always did think you were the hero in this story. Emily could feel the tension in the room like a live wire, crackling and heavy. Her stomach twisted painfully. Her entire life, she had believed her parents were normal, ordinary people. Now, she wasn't sure who they were at all. The man on the phone let the silence stretch, letting his presence sink into her skin, settle in her bones. Then he spoke again, soft but firm. Rebecca. Her breath stilled. Come home. Her vision blurred, her chest tightening as an impossible weight pressed down on her. Come home. She didn't have a home. Not anymore. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then click. The line went dead. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking. Unknown number. No way to trace it. No way to call back. But deep down, she knew. He wasn't going to stop. Her mother let out a slow, measured breath. He found us, she whispered. Daniel's expression darkened. We knew this day would come. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. You knew this would happen? She demanded. And you didn't tell me? Her mother turned to her, desperate, pleading. We were trying to protect you. By lying to me? Emily's voice cracked. By making me think I was stolen? Her father's jaw tightened. You were stolen. Emily's stomach dropped. Not by us, he said firmly. By him. The weight of the words settled deep in her chest. She had spent the last few weeks believing her parents were the villains in this story, that they had taken her, erased her past, built a life on stolen time. But what if they had been telling the truth all along? What if they hadn't stolen her? What if they had saved her? Her mind spun violently. She needed air. She needed space. She turned on her heel and bolted out the front door. Emily, her mother called, but she didn't stop. She ran. The cold night air stung her skin, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts raced, colliding, breaking apart, reforming into something she couldn't grasp. Nothing made sense. Everything made sense. She was losing her grip on reality. Or maybe she was finally seeing it for what it was. A sudden vibration in her pocket jolted her back. A message. Unknown number. Her hands trembled as she opened it. I've waited 15 years for this moment. We need to talk. Her breath shuddered out. Another text. I'll find you soon. A chill ran down her spine. She had a choice. She could keep running, keep hiding, or she could face the truth. But what if the truth was the most dangerous thing of all? Her phone buzzed again. One final message. Good night, Rebecca. Sweet dreams. Emily didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 15 years pressing down on her chest like an anchor. The phone sat on her nightstand, the screen dark, but she could still feel his words crawling under her skin. I'll find you soon. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw fragments of a past she couldn't remember. Flashes of a house she didn't recognize, hands reaching for her in the dark, a voice whispering her name. Rebecca. It didn't feel real. Couldn't be real. Because if everything her parents had told her was true, then that meant the life she had been living wasn't just built on lies. It was built on fear. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. Her pulse hammered as she sat up. Yeah. The door opened slowly. Her father stood there, silhouetted against the dim hallway light. You okay? His voice was quiet, cautious. Emily swallowed hard. Not really. Daniel nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. He had been the one keeping the secrets, after all. He hesitated before stepping inside, closing the door behind him. I know you don't trust us right now, he said, sitting down at the edge of her bed. And I don't blame you. We should have told you the truth a long time ago. Emily looked down at her hands. But you didn't. No, he exhaled slowly. Because we were afraid. Emily's throat tightened. Of what? Her father didn't answer right away. He stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his fingers laced together. Then finally, of him. The weight of his words settled in her chest like lead. Emily took a shaky breath. Tell me everything. Daniel looked at her, his face lined with exhaustion, with something deeper, something that looked like regret. It started before you were born, he said. Your mother and I, we weren't always the people you know now. We worked in law, high-profile cases, dangerous ones. We saw things, learned things, made enemies without even realizing it. Emily's stomach twisted. And she hesitated. My biological father? Daniel's expression darkened. He wasn't a good man. A chill ran down her spine. Who was he? Silence. Then very softly, his name was Richard Calloway. The name sent a shiver through her body. It didn't feel familiar, but the weight of it did. Calloway? She echoed. What did he do? Daniel exhaled slowly. He controlled people. He built an empire of influence, government, business, law enforcement. He had connections everywhere. People feared him, and with good reason. He had a way of making problems disappear. Emily's hands clenched into fists. And you knew him? Daniel hesitated. Not at first. But when Linda came to us for help, we had no choice. Emily's breath caught. Linda. Her father nodded. She was desperate. She had been trying to get away from him for years. But every time she got close, he found a way to pull her back in. And when you were born, that's when things got worse. Emily's mind reeled. I don't understand, she whispered. If she was trying to leave, why did she? She didn't have a choice. Daniel's jaw tightened. She knew he would never let her go. And she knew, sooner or later, he would do the same thing to you. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. So she ran, Daniel continued. She tried to disappear. She hid you, changed your last name, moved from city to city. But he always found her. And then one night, she didn't wake up. Emily's stomach lurched. What? She was drugged, Daniel said. She told the police she didn't remember anything, just that she put you to bed. And when she woke up, you were gone. Emily felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. Everyone assumed it was him, Daniel said. The police, the investigators, they all believed Richard had taken you. But there was no proof, no witnesses. And then, just as quickly as you disappeared, so did he. Emily's skin prickled. You're saying my biological father went missing? Daniel nodded. After you were taken, he vanished. No one saw him again. The case went cold. Linda gave up hope. And 5 years later, we found you. Emily's breath hitched. We didn't take you, Emily, her father said, his voice breaking. We found you. And when we realized who you were, what had happened, we knew we had to protect you. Emily's hands trembled. Then why didn't you tell me? Daniel's expression softened. Because we didn't know if he was still out there. The room felt smaller, darker. If he had been waiting, her father said. If he had been watching, we didn't want to give him a reason to come back. Emily's chest ached. But he had come back. Her phone buzzed again. She flinched, her fingers shaking as she picked it up. Another message. Unknown number. You can't run from who you are. I'll see you soon. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Daniel leaned forward, his voice urgent. Emily, listen to me. If he's reaching out to you, it means he's ready. He's waited all these years for the right moment. And now he thinks he's won. Emily's breath was shallow, uneven. What does he want? Daniel's expression was grim. You. A chill ran down her spine. Claire's voice echoed in her mind. What if you don't want to know the truth? Emily had spent her entire life searching for answers. Now she wished she had never asked. Her father reached out, gently squeezing her hands. We won't let him take you, Emily. But deep down she knew it was too late for that, because he had already found her. And now there was no turning back.